Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Career Changes. Today, our guest is Laura Nguyen, business strategist, advocate for workplace well-being, and author of the book Career Break Compass, Navigating Your Path to a Balanced Life Through Intentional Time Off. Today, she's here to talk about her career journey and the power of taking time off. Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So, let's start with your career. First of all, what was your dream job when you were a child?
When I was a child, I thought for certain that I would be a doctor. And so I actually did internships in the hospital and spent a ton of time, especially in high school and in my early years of college, prepping to be a physician, really. And that really shifted for me. Obviously, I don't do that now, but I think there was definitely a passion around science and helping people and taking care of people and helping them really better their own health.
Mm. And did your family have any impact on your career choices at all, or did you do something completely different?
Yeah, yes, they for sure had an influence. Growing up as a first generation Vietnamese person who's living in the US, and my parents were refugees from the Vietnam War. And as a stereotypical Asian, our expectation was to be a doctor or a lawyer. And so that really was the heavy early influence of entering healthcare was for sure influenced by not just my parents, but really my entire family. And even today, I have numerous cousins, and even my brother is in the healthcare field. And I actually started my career on the corporate kind of comms communication side. So I did marketing communications and I was working a lot on mergers and acquisitions. And a lot of that work was also in the healthcare space. And so I ended up for sure touching healthcare for a good, I would say half of my career was healthcare focused.
Mhm. And then what was the turning point that made you decide to become a business strategist and advocate for workplace well-being?
So for me, really the shift happened in college, and I was really interested in understanding a lot of the psychological components of what drives and motivates people's behavior. And the other side to that was I just really had a passion for understanding systems, so organizational systems. So actually, what my plan was, I actually graduated pre-law, so I was planning on going to law school, and like I said, working on the corporate law side of the house. But I had an internship that really opened up my eyes. And I really loved being able to build campaigns. And I love the measurement analytics side of marketing. And so that was my shift, was the exposure to another field through an internship then allowed me to make a significant pivot that kind of took me on a very different path than I had planned.
Mhm. And what personal experiences led you then later on to write Career Break Compass?
I had spent most of my career, I've always been someone who loves to move quickly and perform really well and do the right thing. And so when I started working, I was really interested in how do I continue to just be a sponge and be involved in as much as I possibly could. And so what ultimately happened was the pressures of really doing well at work, the pressures of being really involved in my community, the pressures of ensuring that I had a really great family life and trying to balance all of these roles that we all deal with all the time led me to really bad burnout. So I experienced some pretty bad burnout personally. And what I recognized was I hadn't gotten clear for me personally of what do I care about? What are my values? How do I want to really be thoughtful about how I live my life? And what are the paths that I can take to make sure I'm living an intentional life? So, personally, for me, what happened was I decided to take a career break, an intentional break away from work. And I created a structure for myself to not just recover from burnout, but also be really thoughtful about how I want to work and live in the future. And I started journaling, and that was really the beginning of the book Career Break Compass, was my reflections during my career break, both as I was planning it, but also while I was in it. And then following that, how I returned from it. Career Break Compass is all about how to plan, take, and re-enter the workforce after a career break.
Mhm. As an expert of career breaks, let's talk about this topic. Why do you believe taking intentional time off is crucial for a balanced life?
Yeah, I think the truth is that many of us, when we take a vacation, we're working during that time period. And I've always been someone, my dad is an engineer. And one of the things that was always a unique kind of curiosity and tenacity piece for him was if there was a problem, he couldn't stop thinking about it. And we probably have some of those, whether it's at work or at home or whatever it might be. If we're really trying to understand and solve a problem, it's really tough for us to let go of that. And what we need to recognize is that when you take intentional breaks, what it actually allows us to do is get exposure to other thought processes, get exposure to other disciplines that allow you to start to tackle problems and questions in a totally different way. So I'm an advocate for career breaks, not just because it's about rest and recovery, but also because it allows you to have different perspectives and open yourself up to what are the possibilities, not just in your life, but also the problems that you're solving.
And how can career breaks benefit both personal well-being and also professional growth?
I really break the career break into four core areas, and it's play, pause, plan, and pursue. And so when I think about personal and professional, play and pause, so often we are just running 100 miles an hour. And we're not taking the time to be thoughtful and intentional about what's this, like I said before, what's this problem we're trying to solve? What are we trying to address? What is a life I want to create for myself? We're not thinking about those things. And most importantly, we're not actually in the moment. And that's really the core challenge is that we're not spending time in the moment. So play is about how do you re-inject joy into your life again, where you're doing things that are fun and allowing you to be in flow, which is actually where all the creativity happens. Pause is about being mindful and being present with what's happening around you, with your feelings and what's going on, right? Not just in the outside world, but what's going on within you. And so often when I talk to people, they're not listening to themselves enough, meaning like how their body is feeling. They're not listening to themselves in terms of what's that voice inside of them saying that they should really do. And so pause allows us to say, how do I make sure that this practice gets me truer to myself? And then plan is all about how do you create that intentional plan, which is what are your values? What's the type of work and life you want to lead? And you're starting to design your life in a more thoughtful way. And then pursue is about doing the thing, which is about how do you continue to have a growth mindset to continue to grow and develop yourself and have a very experimental type of mindset. When I think about play, pause, plan, and pursue, each aspect of that is both personal and professional because it allows us to say, how do I make sure that I'm filling my cup with the things that make me happy, with the things that allow me to ensure that I'm being present in my life? And then also, how can I be more proactive in terms of the life that I want to create, which means I'm going to be thoughtful about the opportunities that I'm going to be exploring, as well as what are the boundaries I'm going to be able to set to ensure that I'm living that. And then how do I continue to grow and experiment and try new things? That's all both personal and professional.
Mm. And in your experience, what are some of the common challenges that people face when considering a career break and how can they overcome them?
I think the most common ones that come up when it comes to the blockers and barriers to a career break, the first is always going to be financial, which is how can I afford this? How can I afford to take time off? And what I'm here to share is there's so many different options when we think about career breaks. For sure, there's a savings plan that you can put into place. For sure, there is a plan that allows you to eliminate expenses that you probably don't need. But there's also other opportunities depending on what country you're in and depending on what role you have, whether you can take a voluntary or an involuntary leave of absence, right? We talk about that. The other one is layoff numbers are significantly high, especially in the first quarter. And often when people are laid off, they immediately go into trying to find another role. And I always advocate for give yourself time to rest, recover, and rebuild your confidence so that when you're going out to interviewing again, you're in a much clearer space than if you immediately go from layoff to an interview process. And then, of course, there's obviously for those who are struggling with burnout or other medical mental health conditions, like a medical leave of absence could also be an opportunity. And so I would say financial is definitely a blocker, and there's ways that we can address that very logically. The second is an emotional blocker, which is what will people think? Will my family think if I take this time off? What will my employer, my previous colleagues think of when I take this time off? And what will my future role and company I work at when I'm going out to interview think of when I'm taking this time off? And when we think about that challenge, it's about how do you make sure that you have a really rooted perspective in your values of why you want to take this time. And then ensure that you give yourself kind of a block of this is the amount of time I'm planning to take off that factors in my financial, but also what do I want to do when I return? So you want to be really thoughtful about that. And then I would say the third blocker when it comes to taking a career break is fear. And it's the fear of, will I be able to re-enter? Will I be able to find another role that's going to be the right role for me? Or will they even take me if I take a career break? And a lot of that comes down to how do we prep people in the interview process? How do we make sure that their resume is clear around the benefits and the gains they had during their career break? And then also a lot of it's mock interviews. It's more about how you talk about your break versus the actual break itself. So many people get tripped up by being nervous about talking about the break. That actually gets in their own way.
So, is there a solution for these fears? What is the solution?
First off, that's a very real feeling, right? I also felt that fear as well. And a few things that helped me was I created what I call really like an anchor statement, which is when I'm starting to feel that way, what is a statement, an affirmation that gives me a space of, okay, this is my why of why I'm taking this break, so that I can get really clear and grounded in myself. That's really important. And so for some people, that might be, I'm taking this break because I want to make sure that I heal my body and heal my mind. So that could be one piece. The other piece could be, I want to make sure I'm taking this time off because it allows me time and space to spend time with my family and identify what I want to do next. My personal statement was, I'm taking this time off so that I can rest and recharge and ready myself for my next adventure. So that's really the key. And that statement helps ground you in that present moment of why you're taking that time. The next is, for me, I needed a structure, which is the reason why I created the book. Was I wanted to help people who were having blockers of why they couldn't take a career break. Because when you go from having back-to-back meetings to having nothing on your calendar, there's a lot of fear that comes up. And the way that you address it is creating some structure and time blocks throughout your break so that you can allow yourself free space and free thought, but also you have objectives for how you're going to spend that time. And that's what I needed to transition my very busy brain into being able to use this time well, and also well meaning filling and recharging, not just productive.
So, for those who cannot take a full career break, because not everyone can do that, why is it still important to take regular time off? And what are some effective ways to disconnect and recharge, even with short breaks or vacations?
I love this question because the truth is that a career break is not just one and done, right? It's about how do you infuse these practices into your weekly, your daily life? Because what you don't want to get to is getting to the point where you're so exhausted and depleted that you have to take a break to spend that time. I would love for people to be able to be more proactive in how they rest and recharge. So you can still use the 4 Ps in mini breaks, whether that is, for example, one thing that I do now is I like to treat my weekend like a vacation, which is the mindset of how I spend my weekend. I really be thoughtful and intentional about, I don't work on the weekend. That's really clear for me. I used to work every Sunday. That was always a habitual thing for me, that I would always work at least half a day on a Sunday. And now I'm like, I don't work on the weekend, but it's not just about not working. It's about how do you schedule the time to do fun and enjoyable things. And so that could mean scheduling a weekend hike to get out and get some fresh air if you can. It's winter right now, so it's cold in a lot of places. And so for some folks, that might mean like they could go to an indoor gym and try to make sure they're exercising and getting their energy that way. That could mean you're ensuring that you're taking a meditation class or trying to learn a pottery class or learn a new trade, trying to make sure that you're spending the time in a way that is thoughtful and intentional is really key. The next piece really comes down to like, how do you make sure that you're planning things ahead of time? I always talk to clients about this as well, which is what's 4 things that you've always wanted to do that you just haven't prioritized doing? And then they write those 4 things down, and I ask them next, put a date next to it. So that way you're being really clear on when I'm actually going to give myself a deadline to do this work. And so a lot of the times it's about how do you ensure that you're prioritizing yourself and that you're not just watching Netflix on the weekend so that you're losing the time and space. And then my last tip for folks is typically when you think about vacation days, you've got paid holidays from an employer. Try to make sure that you're adding in some of your vacation days around some of those holidays to just be more thoughtful about how do you extend your break. So for example, here in the States, there's an upcoming holiday and that's on a Monday. What you could do is you could add Friday and Tuesday. So you just took a 3-day weekend to a 5-day weekend. That gives you a little bit more time and allows you to have a little bit more rest and recharge and gives you the chance to go do something you probably wouldn't do in just a 3-day weekend.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes we all get lost in the day-to-day activities, but how can taking regular time off can improve overall our mental health and also our job performance?
So, a couple things when you think about ensuring you're taking time off, right? Time off allows you to disconnect from the day to day stimulus of work, which when we talked about it, I think about it like shaking up a bottle that has, let's say you have a bottle with glitter in it, right? So, like on a daily basis, it's constantly being shaken. And when that happens, it causes a lot of internal friction and stimulus for you. So taking time off allows all of that glitter and dust to settle and allows you to be thoughtful about what are the areas that you want to pick and choose? How do you prioritize things differently? It just gives you a different refresh perspective. I think that's really key. I think the other thing to do is that we have to make sure that we're scheduling time throughout our day for rest. And there's tons of academic studies out there that talk about the structure of how we look at our time, which means that if you are in back-to-back meetings and you have no breaks, the fatigue that happens to you and your brain is real and true. We feel it ourselves in our bodies. So allow yourself, let's say you have back-to-back meetings, instead of doing 1-hour meetings, do 45-minute meetings so that you have a 15-minute break to get up, get your water, maybe go outside for a few minutes and just get some fresh air to allow your brain to rest and recharge for the next challenge. Otherwise, we continue to be in a state of high fatigue. And that is really what leads to a lot of like chronic burnout for us because of all of these micro stressors.
Yeah, definitely. So time is going very fast. We have a few more questions, but we are reaching the end of this episode. But first of all, for those feeling burnout or stuck in their careers, what initial steps would you recommend they take?
Yeah. So if you're feeling burnt out in your career, I think the real question is what's causing the burnout, right? And most of the time, people think burnout is from overwork. But in fact, there's different reasons that lead to burnout scientifically. So on my website, I have a burnout quiz. It's based off of Christina Maslach's burnout inventory assessment. So you can go on my website, it's lauranguyen.co, and we can probably include the link in the show notes for you. But you can go there, take the quiz, and then understand what are the reasons for your burnout. Because what tends to happen is values misalignment is one of the top reasons that burnout happens. And when you talk about values misalignment, that means that we have to understand at an individual basis what our core values are and how that matches with our employer, with our manager, and with our team. And so it starts with us to really understand that piece of it and really get clear on what are the things that we care about. How do we want to live our life based on what we care about? And then whether or not it is in alignment with the type of work we're doing.
You're happy other people with career breaks, but looking back, how have your career break or career breaks positively impacted your own life and career?
I think of my career break as really the most transformative experience that I've had so far in my professional career, meaning that it gave me more clarity on how I want to show up at work, how I want to show up for my teams, how I want to show up in my business and how I want to show up in my family life. And I think that shift allowed me to recognize in my body when I'm starting to hit a threshold, meaning in my day-to-day experience today, when I'm at work and when I'm working with people, whether that is in my consulting business, whether that's in a full-time, whether that's in a coaching engagement, whatever it is, right? I start to understand myself better of I'm out of my window of not really, let's say they call it a window of tolerance, but it's about thinking about, am I too high or too low in certain areas? And my career break gave me more clarity on where am I at a baseline. And if I'm starting to over index in a certain area, how do I make sure that I'm taking care of myself so that I can recalibrate? Before my career break, I was always operating outside of that threshold. And I was angry and I was resentful and I really wasn't doing my best work in life. And now I can actually just start to resettle myself into a different place of what's important, what are my priorities, and when am I out of whack?
We are now really reaching the end of this episode, but we have one more question. You gave a lot of advice to everyone that is listening and people that are aiming to maybe take a career break or explore more taking time off. But if you could give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say to your younger self?
My younger self, I would have said, take the time to expose yourself to more ideas, more people, more thought processes versus just your isolated system. Meaning, I felt, especially in my career, when I was feeling really burnt out, I felt really alone in that process. And I felt like I didn't really have the feedback or the research to help me through it. And so, from my younger self perspective, I wish that she had more of those real conversations about burnout in the workplace, or let's say parental burnout, to be able to talk about the things we don't talk about, right? To recognize that, like, when you're in that space, it is so common and you're not the only one, and that you can find other people to help support you. I think that would be for sure the piece. If I could look back, that would be the most impactful thing for me.
Thank you, Laura, so much for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. And for our listeners, don't forget to check out Career Break Compass and explore the power of taking intentional time off. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and tune in next week for a new inspirational episode of the Career Changes. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.